Deka had always been the quiet one, content with his simple life in the village. When his father passed away, the elders summoned him to hear the reading of the will. There, in the middle of a circle of wise old men, Deka learned that his father had left him something of great value, an expanse of fertile land, stretching far beyond what Deka had imagined. It was a surprising and overwhelming gift, especially since Deka's cousins, who were known for their ambition and fiery tempers, had been left with nothing but smaller portions of farmland and a few trinkets. Whispers spread like wildfire through the village. Some murmured that Deka's father had always favored him, while others wondered if there was more to the story, perhaps a secret reason why the land was left to the most reserved of the family. The decision did not sit well with his cousins, especially with Yarrow, the eldest and most outspoken of them all. He was known for his sharp tongue and quick temper, and now he felt humiliated. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere grew tense. Deka, though uncomfortable with the sudden attention, accepted the land with gratitude. He hoped to bring prosperity to the family and prove that his father's choice had not been in vain. He spent his days learning the lay of the land, exploring the hidden paths and familiarizing himself with the fertile soil. But it wasn't long before strange things began to happen. It started with small signs, a sudden chill in the air as he walked through the fields, the faint sound of whispers carried on the breeze, and the feeling of being watched even when he was alone. Deka dismissed them as tricks of his imagination, until his uncle, the eldest member of the extended family, fell gravely ill. The sickness came suddenly and without warning. Within days, his uncle's body became frail, his skin turning a sickly shade of grey, and a fever that no herbal remedy could soothe took hold of him. The villagers began to talk, blaming the illness on the land, calling it cursed. They said the spirits were displeased that Deka, a young and untested man, had taken what was rightfully theirs. Fear began to creep into the hearts of his family members, and soon another cousin, the youngest of Yarrow's brothers, fell ill with the same mysterious symptoms. Deka's mother, racked with worry, pleaded with him to seek answers, to find out what curse had been brought upon them. Deka, confused and desperate, sought out the village elder, a wise woman named Akuta, known for her knowledge of the old ways and her connection to the spiritual realm. Her home was on the edge of the forest, far from the center of the village, and it was said she could speak to the spirits that roamed the land. When Deka arrived, Akuta welcomed him with a knowing look, as if she had been expecting him all along. "The land holds secrets that you do not yet understand," she said, her voice low and firm. "Your father made promises, boy. Promises that must not be broken. If you are to end this curse, you must uncover the truth he hid, and make amends." Deka's blood ran cold. He pressed her for answers, but Akuta only gave him a single piece of advice before turning him away. "Find the stone marker in the eastern fields. Dig beneath it, and you will find what you seek." Armed with nothing but a spade and the elder's cryptic words, Deka set off for the eastern edge of his land, where a weathered stone marker stood half buried in the earth. It was an old boundary stone, carved with symbols he could not understand. He began to dig, the soil loose and dark under his fingers. The further he dug, the more his heart pounded, until the spade hit something solid, a wooden box, sealed tightly with twine. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was a stack of faded papers, a contract, written in his father's handwriting. It was a pact with the spirits of the land, promising offerings in exchange for prosperity. Deka's father had agreed to perform certain rituals, each tied to the phases of the moon, to keep the spirits appeased. But the last entry in the contract was incomplete. His father had broken the agreement, failing to perform the final ritual before his death. Deka felt a wave of dread, realizing that the curse had been set in motion the moment his father took his final breath. He brought the papers to Akuta, who examined them with a frown. "Your father was a fool," she said bluntly. "He sought power and wealth without paying the full price. Now the spirits are angry, and they are claiming what was promised to them. What do I do?" Deka asked, his voice breaking. He had no idea how to perform the rituals his father had begun, and he feared what the spirits would demand to restore balance. "Perform the final ritual," Akuta instructed, "and the sickness will end. But you must do it before the next full moon, or the curse will spread until none of your bloodline remains. Deka's heart sank, but he knew he had no choice. Yet, even as he prepared to carry out Akuta's instructions, his family's resentment only grew. His cousins, especially Yarrow, believed he was somehow responsible for the sickness that had befallen their loved ones. They whispered that Deka had made a deal with dark forces, that he had stolen the inheritance by twisting their father's mind, and now the spirits were punishing them for his greed. Yarrow, filled with rage and jealousy, began to stir trouble among the family. He spread rumors that Deka had known about the curse all along, and had inherited the land not by chance, but by cunning. It wasn't long before some of the family members, desperate and afraid, began to side with Yarrow, demanding that Deka give up the land and its supposed curse to save them all. Deka, feeling the weight of their distrust and the looming deadline of the full moon, found himself isolated and alone. With the sickness spreading and his family's accusations growing louder, Deka began the preparations for the final ritual. He gathered herbs, chanted prayers taught by Akuta, and drew the sacred symbols his father had once inscribed. But the more he prepared, the more the doubts clawed at his heart. Could he truly end the curse, or was he only delaying the inevitable? His resolve was tested when, on the eve of the full moon, Yarrow and a group of his cousins confronted him at the boundary of the cursed land. Yarrow's eyes burned with anger, his hands shaking as he pointed an accusing finger at Deka. "You brought this upon us," he shouted, his voice hoarse with rage. "You're cursed just like this land. Hand it over, or I swear I will take it from you by force." Deka's voice was steady, but his heart ached with the betrayal of his kin. "This land was my father's choice," he said. "I'm trying to save us, save our family. If you take it now, the curse will never end." Yarrow stepped closer, his face twisted with bitterness. "And what if the only way to save the family is to get rid of you?" The confrontation escalated, with words sharp as knives and fists clenched at the ready. Deka's mind raced, torn between his duty to his father's legacy and the fear that his family might truly turn against him. The full moon was only hours away, and the ritual had to be completed without further delay. But Yarrow's threat hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over everything Deka had struggled to accomplish. As darkness settled over the land, the winds picked up, carrying a low, mournful howl that made the hair on the back of Deka's neck stand on end. The spirits were watching, waiting, as the tension between the cousins reached a boiling point. Deka knew that the next move he made could either save his family, or condemn them all. Deka felt the weight of Yarrow's threat settle in his chest like a stone. The shadows around them grew darker, and the wind carried with it a chilling whisper, as if the spirits themselves were eager for the confrontation to unfold. For a long moment, Deka stood silent, staring at Yarrow's angry, desperate face. He knew that any wrong word would shatter the already fragile peace, but time was slipping away. He could feel the full moon's approach in the tightening of his chest, the sense that the land was holding its breath. "Yarrow," he said softly, lowering his voice so that only his cousin could hear, "you don't understand what you are asking. If I don't finish the ritual, the sickness will spread, and it won't just be the elders who suffer. It will come for all of us, and it will not stop until the bloodline—" Yarrow's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with distrust. "More lies, Deka. You're just trying to keep the land for yourself. What makes you so special that you think you can do what our fathers couldn't?" "Nothing," Deka replied, his voice almost breaking. "There's nothing special about me, but if this land is truly cursed, then I'm the one who has to set it right, no one else. If you take it now before the ritual is complete, the curse will be yours to bear. Do you really want that burden?" Yarrow's eyes flickered, a shadow of doubt passing over his face, but before he could answer, one of the other cousins, Kumi, a tall and thin man with a nervous energy, stepped forward. "He's stalling," Kumi shouted. "We don't have time to argue. Take the land back now, before the sickness claims another one of us." Encouraged by Kumi's words, the others began to press forward, their faces hardened with a mix of fear and anger. Deka's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that if they forced him off the land now, everything would be lost. He had to act, and he had to act quickly. He raised his hands, palms open, in a gesture of peace. Please, he pleaded, his voice rising over the growing murmur of the crowd. If you won't trust me, then trust the spirits. Let me perform the ritual tonight, under the full moon. If the sickness does not end by dawn, then the land is yours. I'll leave and never return. Yarrow hesitated, his eyes flickering between Deka and the others, weighing the choice in his mind. Finally, he gave a single, reluctant nod. One night, Deka, he said, his voice cold and unforgiving. You have until dawn. If the sickness remains, we will drive you out ourselves. The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves, and Deka felt a brief surge of relief as the tension eased. But he knew that his reprieve was only temporary. The spirits had granted him a chance, and he could not afford to waste it. As the moon rose higher in the sky, Deka hurried to prepare the sacred space. He gathered herbs from his father's old garden, bitter leaves, fragrant roots, and dark berries that he crushed into a paste. He lit a fire at the center of the clearing, the flames crackling and sending sparks into the night. He traced the symbols from the faded contract in the dirt, his hands shaking as he remembered Akuta's warnings. Every mark had to be perfect, every line true, or the spirits would know he was unworthy. The moon was nearly at its zenith when he heard a rustle from the edge of the clearing. Deka's breath caught as he saw a figure step into the firelight. It was Yarrow, his face half hidden in shadow. Deka tensed, expecting an attack, but Yarrow merely watched, his expression unreadable. What are you doing here? Deka asked, his voice wary. Yarrow shrugged, his eyes fixed on the fire. I want to see if you really mean to go through with this, or if you're just playing games. I don't have a choice, Deka replied. And neither do you. If you believe I'm lying, then stay and watch. See for yourself what the spirits demand. Yarrow said nothing, but he did not move. He stood just outside the circle, arms crossed, his gaze as cold and distant as the moon overhead. Deka turned back to the fire, his nerves stretched taut as he began to chant the prayers his father had once spoken. His voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger, the words flowing from his lips as if they had been waiting in his blood all along. The wind picked up, swirling the smoke around him, and Deka felt the power of the land thrumming beneath his feet. He reached for the wooden box he had buried, pulling out the small carved totem that had been wrapped in cloth. It was an offering, one his father had used for each ritual, a token of respect to the spirits. He held it over the fire, feeling the heat lick at his fingers, and closed his eyes. I am Deka, son of Ogud, he said, his voice ringing out into the night. I come to honor the pact my father made. I seek your forgiveness and your favor, that the curse may be lifted and my family spared. The wind died suddenly, and a profound silence settled over the clearing. Even the crackling of the fire seemed to dim, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Deka felt a cold presence settle around him, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. He kept his eyes closed, praying that he had done enough, that his words had reached the spirits. But then a harsh, mocking laugh broke the stillness, and Deka's eyes snapped open. Yarrow had stepped into the circle, his face twisted with contempt. You think this is enough? Yarrow sneered, his voice loud and defiant. You think your little ritual will save us? You don't even know what you're dealing with, Deka. You're just a boy, playing at being a man. Get out of the circle, Deka shouted, his heart slamming against his ribs. You don't understand what you're doing. But Yarrow only laughed, kicking at the lines Deka had drawn in the dirt, smearing the carefully inscribed symbols with his boot. The fire flared, the flames leaping higher, and a gust of wind roared through the clearing, nearly knocking Deka off his feet. The ground shuddered beneath them, and a low, ominous rumble echoed through the trees. Yarrow, stop! Deka cried, reaching out to pull him back, but it was too late. The symbols were broken, the lines incomplete, and the power that had been building in the clearing shattered like glass. A terrible roar filled the air, a sound like the earth itself screaming, and Deka felt a wave of cold wash over him, the fire's heat extinguished in an instant. Yarrow staggered back, his face pale, his defiance suddenly replaced by fear. What have you done? He whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind that now howled like a wounded animal. What have you? The ground split open beneath him, a jagged crack running through the circle, and Yarrow was thrown to the ground. Deka tried to reach him, but a force he could not see or name held him back, as if the air itself had solidified. He watched helplessly as a shadow rose from the earth, a dark, writhing form that seemed to shift and twist like smoke, yet had a terrible, tangible weight. It loomed over Yarrow, who lay frozen with terror, his eyes wide and staring. "Please," Deka shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "Spirits of the land, I beg you, spare him. This was my fault, not his." The shadow hesitated, then turned slowly to face Deka. He could feel its eyes, though it had none, two cold burning points of light that pierced him to the core. He felt the full weight of the curse settle upon him, pressing down like a great, invisible hand. It was a judgment, a reckoning, and he knew in that moment that he had failed. The shadow moved, swift and silent, and Yarrow's scream was cut off before it even began. The wind died as suddenly as it had risen, leaving the clearing empty and still, the air heavy with a silence that was worse than any noise. Yarrow was gone, and the crack in the earth had vanished, leaving no trace of what had occurred. Deka fell to his knees, his body shaking, tears streaming down his face. He had tried to save his family, to honor his father's pact, but now the curse had taken Yarrow, and the spirits were still not appeased. He had lost everything, the trust of his family, the land he had tried so hard to protect, and perhaps even his soul. But even as he knelt there, despair weighing him down, he heard a faint sound, a soft, echoing whisper, like the rustling of leaves. It was a voice, low and distant, calling his name. He looked up, wiping the tears from his eyes, and saw a faint glow in the darkness, a light that seemed to flicker and dance just beyond the edge of the clearing. Deka rose unsteadily to his feet, drawn toward the light like a moth to a flame. He knew, without understanding how, that it was the spirits who were calling him, summoning him to face the consequences of his failure. He took a step forward, and then another, the weight of the land's curse pressing down on his shoulders. He knew he was out of time. Deka followed the flickering light, his feet moving almost of their own accord. It seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the land, his land, a place where the trees grew thicker, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. He felt the air grow colder with each step, a chill that settled deep into his bones. His mind was a swirl of fear, regret and confusion, but he knew there was no turning back. The spirits had called him, and he would answer, even if it meant facing his doom. The glow led him to a clearing he had never seen before, a circle of ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to lean inward as if listening to secrets. In the center was an old shrine, crumbling stone and twisted roots, covered in moss and shadow. The light hovered above the shrine, flickering like a dying flame, and Deka hesitated at the edge of the clearing, a terrible sense of foreboding gripping his heart. Then he saw them, his father and Yarrow standing side by side, their faces blank and their eyes empty. They were like shadows, pale and insubstantial, and Deka's breath caught in his throat. His father's eyes, once warm and wise, were now cold and distant, and Yarrow's face was twisted with the same anger he had shown before his disappearance. They stood like guardians, blocking the way to the shrine, and Deka knew that they were neither alive nor at peace. "Why?" Deka's voice broke as he stepped forward. "Why did you do it, father? Why did you make that pact?" His father's spirit did not move, did not speak, but Deka could feel the weight of his gaze, the cold judgment of a man who had died with secrets he'd never shared. Deka's fists clenched, frustration and grief building inside him like a storm. "I'm trying to make it right," he shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. "But I don't know how. What do you want from me?" A low, rumbling sound filled the clearing, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, a voice that was both his father's and not. "You are not worthy, Deka. The land was never yours to claim." Deka's anger flared. "Then why did you leave it to me? Why did you make me responsible if I was never meant to be the one to protect it?" But his father's spirit only turned away, vanishing into the shadows without another word. Yarrow's spirit remained, his expression twisted with rage and pain. He stepped closer, and Deka's heart ached to see the anger and betrayal in his cousin's eyes. "You took everything from me," Yarrow's spirit hissed, his voice echoing with the bitterness that had haunted him in life. "And you failed to save us. You were never strong enough." With those words, Yarrow's spirit dissolved into the air, leaving Deka alone in the clearing with the flickering light above the shrine. A deep despair settled over him. He had lost his family, failed his father's legacy, and now he stood on the brink of losing his own soul. But the light was still there, still waiting. It pulsed, a steady, calming glow, and Deka took a deep breath, feeling a strange clarity wash over him. Perhaps he had been a fool. Perhaps he had never been worthy. But he was here, and he would not turn away now. He stepped forward, into the center of the circle, and knelt before the shrine. The air grew colder, and the light dimmed, but Deka's voice was steady as he spoke the words of the final ritual, the words he had read in the faded contract, the words his father had never completed. He chanted the names of the spirits, offered the herbs he had gathered, and laid the carved totem on the shrine, his hands trembling with both fear and resolve. "I give you this offering," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "In the name of my father, O Good, who broke his promise. I give you my blood, that you may be appeased." With a single, swift motion, Deka pulled a knife from his belt and cut his palm, letting his blood drip onto the totem. The ground trembled, and the light flared, blazing so brightly that Deka had to shield his eyes. A roar filled the clearing, a sound like 1,000 voices crying out at once, and Deka felt a rush of power surge through him. A power that was both terrible and beautiful, a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light vanished. The roar faded, and the clearing was silent once more. The shrine was empty, the totem gone, and Deka was alone, his hands still bleeding. He waited, breathless, for a sign that the spirits had accepted his offering, but there was nothing, only the stillness of the trees and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. He had failed. He had given everything, and it had not been enough. Deka rose to his feet, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. He had no idea what he would tell his family, how he would face them after losing both Yarrow and the chance to break the curse. He turned to leave the clearing, but as he did, he caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the trees, a woman, draped in robes of white, her eyes shining with a light that was not of this world. "Do not be afraid," she said, her voice gentle and kind. "You have done what was asked of you. The spirits are at peace." Deka's breath caught, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, her face serene and radiant. "I am the guardian of this land," she said. "Your father made a pact with the spirits to protect it, and when he broke his promise, the curse was born. But you, Deka, have proven yourself worthy." A wave of relief washed over Deka, and he felt tears streaming down his face. "Then why do I still feel this emptiness?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why do I still feel like I've failed?" "Because you have lost much," the guardian said gently. "The price of breaking a curse is always high. Your family will not forget what has been lost, and neither will you. But you have saved them, Deka. That is what matters." Deka bowed his head, the weight of her words settling over him. He wanted to believe her, to believe that his sacrifice had been enough, but he knew that the scars would remain long after the curse was gone. The land was his, but the cost had been great, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. The guardian reached out and touched his cheek, her hand cool and comforting. "Go home, Deka," she said softly. "Go home, and tend to the land that is now yours. It will heal, as will you. The spirits are watching, and they will guide you." Deka nodded, his heart heavy, but his spirit unbroken. He watched as the guardian faded into the night, her form dissolving like mist in the moonlight, leaving him alone in the clearing. The forest was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. A peaceful silence, free of the curse that had haunted it for so long. He turned and walked back through the trees, the path strangely clear and open, as if the land itself was guiding him home. When he emerged from the forest, he saw his family gathered outside the house, their faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. His mother was there, her eyes red with tears, and the younger cousins clung to each other, their expressions uncertain. Deka's heart swelled with emotion, and he walked forward, holding out his bloodied hand as a sign of his sacrifice. "It is done," he said, his voice strong and steady. "The curse is broken." There was a moment of silence, and then his mother rushed forward, wrapping him in a tight embrace, her tears soaking his shirt. One by one, the family members began to move closer, their anger and distrust giving way to relief and gratitude. Even those who had sided with Yarrow seemed to understand that something profound had changed, and they gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder. The sickness that had plagued the family began to fade in the days that followed, and the land grew fertile and green once more. Deka worked the fields with a renewed sense of purpose, feeling the spirit's presence around him, guiding his hands as he planted the seeds of a new future. The grief of losing Yarrow and his father's secrets lingered, but he found strength in the land and in the family he had saved. Years later, when he had children of his own, he would tell them the story of the pact, the story of how the land had once been cursed and how it had been saved. He would tell them of his father's mistakes, of Yarrow's anger, and of the sacrifice that had restored peace to their family. And he would teach them to honor the land, to respect the spirits, and to never forget the price of breaking a promise. In the end, the land flourished, as did the family, and Deka became known as a man of wisdom and strength, a leader who had faced the darkness and emerged whole. The scars of the past remained, but they were a reminder of the choices that had shaped him. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, let us know your views in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one.